Tonight's story begins in a city that already feels like it belongs to the night. New Orleans, a place of old streets, iron balconies, above-ground tombs, candlelit rooms, and stories that seem to cling to the walls. Welcome to Mind-Bending Mysteries. My name is Tammy, and everything you're about to hear is based on New Orleans history, local legends, reported folklore, the stories that have been passed down for generations. Some parts are documented history, other parts are legend, and some parts sit somewhere in between. Any theories discussed tonight are presented as speculation, not established fact, because mystery without discipline becomes misinformation. Now, before we talk about vampires, we need to talk about New Orleans, because vampire stories don't just grow anywhere. They grow in places where death feels close, where history is layered, where beauty and darkness live side by side. And in New Orleans, that's always been that kind of place. A city shaped by French, Spanish, African, Caribbean, Catholic, and Creole influences. A city where cemeteries sit above ground because of the water table. A city where yellow fever epidemics once swept through neighborhoods. A city where people understood death not as something far away, but as something that could come through the door at any time. And that matters because vampires are not just monsters. They are stories humans created to explain fear. Fear of disease, fear of death, fear of strangers, fear of someone who looks human but may not be. Now, one of the earliest vampire legends in New Orleans begins with the Casket Girls. Now, their real name was Fiella Cassette, and that phrase translates more closely to girls with the boxes or girls with the chests. And the word cassette in Old French referred to a small trunk or storage chest. Over time, English speakers began connecting the word cassette with casket, and slowly the legend evolved. Now, historically, these were real young women sent from France to Louisiana during the 1700s to help settle the colony. Now, they arrived carrying small trunk-like chests containing their belongings, but the legend says something darker arrived with them. Now, according to folklore, the girls arrived pale, quiet, and strange. Some stories claim their boxes were unusually heavy. Others claim strange things began happening after the trunks were brought into the city, and the girls were temporarily housed with the Ursuline nuns at the old Ursuline convent in the French Quarter. And that building would eventually become one of the most famous vampire locations in America. Now, according to legend, the attic windows of the convent were sealed shut. Some versions even claim the shutters were secured with blessed nails to keep something trapped inside. Now, to be clear, there is no historical proof that vampires were hidden in the convent, but listen to how the story feels. Young women arriving from the old world, coffin-like trunks, a convent, a locked attic, a city surrounded by disease, death, and fear. That is exactly how folklore survives. It takes something real and places a shadow behind it. And New Orleans is a city full of shadows. Another famous vampire legend centers around a mysterious man named Jacques Saint-Germain. Now, according to a local legend, he appeared in New Orleans in the early 1900s. Wealthy, elegant, charming, intelligent, almost unnaturally refined. Now, he supposedly lived in the French Quarter and hosted lavish gatherings. Guests described him as fascinating, but also unsettling. Now, people began noticing strange things about him. He rarely seemed to eat. He served food and wine to guests, but almost never consumed anything himself. Then one night, according to the story, a woman either fell or escaped from his balcony. Now, some versions say she claimed he attacked her and tried to drink her blood, but police reportedly entered the home to investigate, but Jacques Saint-Germain had vanished. He was gone. And according to the legend, inside the house, they discovered wine bottles mixed with blood. Now, historically, there is little solid evidence proving the story happened exactly this way. But once again, the details are powerful. A mysterious aristocrat, an old French Quarter mansion, blood, a disappearance. That is the kind of story New Orleans seems designed to create. Then there's the legend of the Carter brothers, one of the darker vampire stories tied to the city. Now, according to local lore, two brothers named John and Wayne Carter lived in the French Quarter during the 1930s. People allegedly began disappearing near their home, and eventually, police supposedly discovered victims tied up inside the residence. They were weak, injured, and drained of blood. Now, the brothers were said to be arrested and executed, but according to the legend, when their tomb was later opened, the bodies were missing. Now again, this story exists mostly as folklore, not verified court history, but it introduces something important. Because vampire legends often become frightening when they stop feeling supernatural and start feeling human. Predators, manipulators, people hiding behind charm and appearances, that's what makes vampire stories disturbing. Because at their core, they are often about trust and danger hiding behind normal human faces. And that brings us to an important question. Why New Orleans? Why did vampire stories attach themselves so strongly to this city? Well, part of it is the architecture, the old homes, the narrow streets, the iron balconies, the candlelight, the cemeteries. But another part is history. Now, long before modern medicine, diseases like yellow fever and tuberculosis devastated cities like New Orleans. People became pale, weak, thin, some coughed blood, some died suddenly, and without scientific understanding, people searched for explanations. Fear needs a shape, and vampires gave fear a body. Then later, New Orleans became forever tied to vampires through fiction, especially through the work of Anne Rice. Her novel, Interview with the Vampire, that helped transform New Orleans into the modern vampire capital in the minds of millions. Now, her vampires were not just monsters. They were intelligent, lonely, beautiful, tragic, immortal beings wandering through candlelit streets searching for meaning. And honestly, that may be one reason vampire stories continue surviving, because vampires represent something deeply human: the fear of aging, the desire for immortality, the fear of death, the temptation of power, and the fear that evil does not always appear monstrous. Sometimes it appears elegant. Now today, New Orleans still embraces vampire culture. There are vampire tours, ghost tours, occult shops, stories passed down through generations, and some people even identify with modern vampire subcultures. Now, does that mean supernatural vampires are secretly walking through the French Quarter? Well, there's no credible evidence proving that, but maybe that's not the real mystery. Maybe the real mystery is why this city, more than almost anywhere else in America, continues producing the same kinds of stories generation after generation. Stories about things hiding in the dark, things feeding off of people, things pretending to be human. Because maybe vampire legends survived for centuries not because people believed in literal monsters, but because deep down, people understand something far more frightening: that the real predators often look completely ordinary. Because mystery without discipline becomes misinformation. And here, we don't just tell stories. We question them, we break them down, and we try to understand what's really going on. Because when you strip away the fangs, the capes, the movies, and the myths, you're still left with something haunting. A city built on beauty and burial. A history filled with sickness, secrets, obsession, and survival. And stories that keep returning, no matter how many times people try to bury them. Maybe every vampire legend in New Orleans has a logical explanation. Maybe every shadow has a street lamp behind it. Maybe every locked attic is simply an attic. But still, when the French Quarter grows quiet late at night, and the balconies fall dark, and the old streets begin to feel like they're watching back, you understand why these stories survived. Not because people know vampires are real, but because in New Orleans, it almost feels possible. From my coast to yours, have a wonderful night.